Montreal Canadiens, they're ingrained. It's been such a part of our culture.
Le bleu, blanc, rouge, the Saint-Fanal, le tricolore, you know, the Habs, you know, the CH, les glorieux.
I think the Montreal Canadiens are part of the fabric of our nation.
This is more than a team. This is part of our identity. This is who we are.
They've had a glorious history. They've won 24 Stanley Cups.
They matter. In 2 words, that's the best way to put it.
Welcome to the Montreal Canadiens. 100 years and 100 stars. A look at the most storied franchise in hockey history. My name is George Stroumboulopoulos, and here we are at the Bell Centre in Montreal. I'm not going to lie to you. As a kid growing up in Toronto, the hockey rink in Montreal, that was my cathedral. Now, when our team has been around for 100 years, you have to know they've had a major impact on their community. And that's what we're going to look at tonight, the Habs throughout the decades. We're going to talk to the players, past and present. We're also going to talk to lots of stars, musicians and artists who grew up inspired by the Montreal Canadiens. And perhaps the most interesting part of the story of Le Bleu, Blanc et Rouge is the relationship that the Canadiens have had with the city of Montreal, an artistic hotbed and the cultural heartbeat of this country. All right, so everybody knows that the Montreal Canadiens have won 24 Stanley Cups. And if you didn't know that, well, chances are some drunk Habs fan has bothered you about it in a bar somewhere. But what most people don't know is that the city of Montreal has actually experienced championships with teams like the Victorias or the Shamrocks or the Maroons or the Wanderers. And they did it in this rink right here called Westmount Arena.
It's goodbye, Broadway. Hello, Montreal.
For a very long time, the French factor in Quebec was outside of the city of Montreal. Anyone who would have come to the city of Montreal in the early 20th century would have been convinced that it was a totally English city.
In 1909, Montreal was indeed 2 solitudes. The English enjoyed music halls and vaudeville, while French Canadians favored something altogether different.
The cultural heroes of the early 20th century for French Canadians were actually opera singers. Napoléon Bisson, Raoul Jobin, Richard Véraud, Pierrette Allary. They were representatives of Quebec culture. They sang at the Met. They sang at Covent Garden.
In 1909, an English-Canadian businessman had a novel idea. A new team made up entirely of French-Canadian players called Les Canadiens. Thing is, the French-only experiment didn't last very long, and soon the English players were skating alongside the French players, and that mix would prove to be a very successful formula for the next century.
The early Habs played through the Great War, U.S. Prohibition. Americans flock north for a good time, and Montreal's reputation for great nightlife is born. During the era, Canadians win 4 Stanley Cups with French-Canadian stars like Auriel Joliette and George Vezina.
And interestingly enough, the Habs' first true genuine superstar was an English kid from Stratford, Ontario. His name was Howie Morenz.
The Canadiens, number 7.
Living here in Stratford, we're very connected to the Habs because Howie Morenz is from here. There is that straight genealogical line between Howie and straight to Montreal.
What we knew was the legend of Howie Morenz and of dying as a result of an injury. You know, having the funeral at the Forum.
Every kid who plays on the Cullitons here in Stratford will claim a bit of Howie Morenz's hockey jersey or his hockey sweater à la Rock Carrière.
We all wore the same costume as Maurice Richard did.
Every kid on the rink had a Habs jersey, you know, and someone liked the hockey sweater.
One of the first books I read coming to Canada was Rock Carrier's the hockey sweater.
I had always worn the red, white, and blue sweater of the Montreal Canadiens. All my friends wore the red, white, and blue sweater.
My parents, who came from South Africa, first bought me a Boston Bruins jersey in the late 1970s and sent me out like that. And I quickly realized that there was no other team to cheer for besides the Habs.
He became somebody that we want to imitate. We would be 8 or 10 guys on this little ring and waiting if we had half an hour before going to Mass on Sunday morning. One was Maurice. I've always been Elmer Lack.
We all pretended to be Gump Worsley and Cornwallis and Lafleur, and we were hopeless, utterly hopeless.
I was always Guy Lafleur I was always stepping across the blue line and taking the big slap shot. It never worked out that well for me at game time, but
outside of my house, road hockey was king.
I used to look up to Ken Dryden, number 29.
I'd put my chin on the stick, and I would dream about being Ken Dryden.
The pucks hurt too much when they came on your body, so I decided to make a career change and go into singing.
To the horror of all my neighbors and friends, I was secretly a Montreal Canadiens fan. I wore a Montreal Canadiens jersey in Toronto. So this was like the reverse of the hockey sweater.
You know, it's hard to imagine when you look at the Forum today, but you know, in the 50s and 60s, this might have been the most important building in the city, and this was the shrine of hockey. For all the great stars that played here over the 70 years, this building truly belongs to Maurice Rocket Richard. And he was way more than just a hockey player. He became a cultural icon for Les Québécois, a working-class guy from the east end of Montreal who went on to become the greatest player of his era.
Whack at it, Maurice Richard right in front, he's finished.
I think hockey became, for a lot of French Canadians, a way to win something. And he was the perfect image of that. He was a winner.
They meant so much to the people in Montreal and to the people in the province of Quebec.
It was more than just a hockey team, I guess. It had a kind of political and cultural life as well.
This man woke up the pride of the French Canadians, which were pretty much treated as second-class citizens. I think hockey became, for a lot of French Canadians, a way out. A lot like basketball was for blacks in America.
I think the fact that Jackie Robinson and the Rocket were in the same town, representing the same thing for different people, it says something about that period in history and this city.
He made history, and rightly so, being the first black player to play in the Major League. He loved Montreal because he was treated so much better in Montreal than he was in a lot of other places.
I remember the time that I had gone with my dad to see Jackie play. My father, I could see how proud he was. His chest swelled with that pride of seeing the first black player. And very, very much the same thing would apply to music, because so many of the American players, they had never been on the bandstand with white players.
Had there not been Oliver Jones and an Oscar Peterson, I don't think I'd be here. Oscar was to jazz what Maurice Richard was to hockey. What an incredible fluke that a kid from Saint-Henri would become the biggest jazz star in the world.
Of course, in Montreal, we probably had around 600 clubs. It was truly the Paris of North America.
It was great. They had the top entertainers from the United States performing there.
Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington's band, or Count Basie.
You could see Ella Fitzgerald at a bar.
And of course, we had Oscar Peterson.